Glory to Jesus Christ. I'm Father Thomas Leah. Welcome once again to Oriental Lumen Television, where we are seeing with both eyes, pun intended, integrationally and incarnationally. Incarnationally, the invisible God made visible through his physical order of creation. That's our vision. And seeing that way, we see everything that way, everything in that light, and we see how everything works together, how God is present and revealed in everything. That's the only true view of life. That is really what our faith is about in the Catholic and Orthodox traditions. I include both of them because they're both sacramentally based traditions. Two lungs that breathe together, as St. John Paul II said. And one of our great expressions of that vision comes to us through the art of the Church, the iconography, in particular Byzantine iconography. We've been looking in this series at various icons, especially ones that have scenes to them, a lot of narrative and hieratic scenes. Now we're going to look more closely at an icon itself, with a simpler composition, but still sophisticated, in this icon of the Mother of God with Christ. This icon is called the Hodegetria, which means showing the way, pointing the way. As you can see, she is pointing to Christ. She is pointing the way. But let's do as we always do, start from the outside and work in. Okay, you've got this whole picture plane here. And what the iconographer has to do, we're going to get a little insight into the iconographer, how we actually create an icon. First, as always, we have to decide on its design, how we're going to set the composition. And here you see you've got a picture plane, rectangular picture plane. You want to paint the icon of the Mother of God with Christ, so you have to look at proportions, Christ in relation to her, proportions within them, the hand, the face, and so on. So everything has to be proportionate. And you have to be able to set it on the picture plane in a way that makes sense. You can't have it running off the picture plane too small or too big, too much background, not enough background. So already you start with the icon with good artistic principles, and a lot of it has to do with the geometric patterns and proportions. So what we have here, if you notice, we have the Mother of God filling most of the picture plane, however, not too high, not running off, allowing a little bit of space for the halo. But also it does something rather interesting. Iconography, when it's painted on a panel, as I mentioned before, iconography finds its ultimate context within the church, the walls and ceilings of the church and the icon screens in the church. But when it's painted on a panel of wood, oftentimes the wood is carved out. So there's like an inset, like a recessed area where the picture plane is actually going to contain the icon itself. But notice what this icon does. And oftentimes iconography does this when it's portrait type icons. It takes the halo of the Mother God, and sometimes even takes the figure itself, and it overlaps it into this other level. So you've got like two dimensions here. You've got this dimension and you've got this recessed dimension. So already you're having a difference in dimensions. This idea of dimension is something we talked about a few times. This sense of dimensionlessness, or without dimensions, what the icon tries to communicate. And watch how it does it in this icon. you've got this plane here, you've got a plane behind it recessed, but the halo overlaps both of them. It's like connecting the two realities, so that as if this isn't existing. This recessed area here, this reality here, and that reality there is overlapped by her halo. And again, it's another way that iconography communicates this sense of there's no dimension, there's no front and back, forward, and so on, because it exists in this life, but it doesn't exist in the next life, at least in the way we understand or envision the next life, that it's eternal, it's boundless, it's without dimension or confines as we understand life here on this earth. Now, the composition is very central, but yet there's a tilting of the head towards Christ. And you notice her eyes, her face. Her face, her eyes, look out at us. This is oftentimes the case. For instance, if I'm looking right at you, someone gets in your face, they look right at your eyes, what are you going to do? It's going to make you do something. It's going to get your attention. You're going to look back at them like, what do you want? Or you're going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to look away. We don't like that when somebody, as they say, gets in our face, gets in our space. And one way to do that is to look right at them. Well, the icon looks out at you. Why? To grab your attention, to grab your gaze. Now, the first thing you're going to see is the face. Usually in an icon or any kind of painting, really, involves human beings. Generally, the first place our eye goes is the face. One of the reasons is because the face is going to be lighter, going to be lit up. And it's generally going to be lit up in contrast to a background and to clothes, which are going to be darker. So already you're going to see your eye is naturally going to be drawn to light. And that should tell you something about how we're really meant to be as human beings. We're meant to seek the light, not the darkness. So when there's light against darkness, we're going to go that way with our eyes. So we go that way with our eyes. And what's the next most significant lit area in this picture plane? Very, very ingeniously designed. Her hand. But look how the hand goes. It's down here, moving in this direction, in this axis. So your eye works like this. Your eye is caught by her face, by her eyes. You kind of drop down along her shoulder, which has its own highlights. See, it's kind of like a little map, a little guide, guiding your eye down here. And then there's this very dramatic axis created by her arm, which is lit there, a highlight. And then her hand, which is lit up. And what is it doing? It's pointing to Christ. This is why this icon is called Showing the Way. Jesus Christ comes to us through the Mother of God. She shows us. She's the intercessor. She's the mediatrix. She intercedes for us. She brings us to Christ and brings Christ to us. So we have two principal areas of light against us. See the darker background of her clothing. And that is what draws our eye in this direction. Catches you here, drops you down here, and shoots you up to Christ. Now, what happens when you finally get to Christ? Well, there's Christ's face, and where is he looking? Out at us again. And then where's the next important lit area? Okay, right in here, in this axis here. This is where all the main action is happening. The face, and right in here. So you see, that's why there's this axis going right up to his hand and face. Hands and face are very, very significant just in our day-to-day life as human beings and communicating, as I'm doing with my hands right now, but also in iconography, because the hands always have meaning. This hand is a hand that's being open to Christ and pointing the way to Christ for us. But his hand then is pointing towards the Virgin Mary, blessing her in the form, his fingers are being held in the form of these letters. The letters ICXC, Isus Christus, Greek for Jesus Christ. I'll demonstrate it this way. I, C, X, these two are crossed, the thumb and ring finger, and then the last one is bent. ICXC. And this is how many Eastern priests will bless. In that rite, the priest keeps his hand straight and blesses. In many Eastern churches, the priest blesses, forming the letters abbreviation for Christ, Isus Christus, because it's the blessing of Christ. He's communicating not his own blessing. It's Christ who's blessing you through the priest, through the office of the priesthood. But Christ is blessing the Virgin Mary. You see, the Virgin Mary leads us to Christ, but Christ makes her who she is. This is like an imposition of grace, a woman full of grace. Like grace comes from God. So there he is imparting the grace and blessing her. Blessed are you among women. Another significant area, of course, is right in here. The hand and the lit scroll here. This, of course, represents the Scripture, the Word of God, the scroll. And there his hand is right there. So this then becomes the second axis. You see, axis 1, axis 2. Notice how they converge? What's happening here? Your eye is coming to that intersection. This is where all the action, the meaning is happening, the main meaning of the icon. So, catch your eye, drop it down, and very quickly shoot it up this way, and then counterbalance that this way. You see how purposeful the design of icon is? This is using very, very sophisticated visual techniques. Why? To communicate the vision, the theology. So you see, iconography requires art skill, art knowledge, and knowing some of the secrets of beauty, of visual beauty that God has woven into his creation. The artist unlocks those, just as a musician unlocks the elements of beauty, of audio beauty in making music. So Christ is now looking at us, Virgin Mary, both are looking at us, grabbing our attention, drawing us into this middle part, which communicates, in a sense, the narrative, the meaning, the theology. His clothing is, usually it's in red or blue to signify his two natures. Here, he's in this denotes a glorious or a kingly function. See, it's like golden clothes, highlighted with gold. This is the armband, which is symbolic of kind of a military type of band. It symbolizes his power, his strength, as he will conquer death. Always we hint at things in iconography as to who Christ really is or who he will be. In fact, you notice his face, yes, it is that of a child, but at the same time, again, here's that both and kind of magic of an icon. The both and spirituality, where it's a child, because his face, his head, obviously is smaller than the Virgin Mary because he's the baby, but yet it looks like a young man. Again, a premonition, iconography trying to hasten our gaze and our attention towards the real why behind it all, the real why behind this child. This is the Christ child who's come to be a man that will save us, die for us, resurrect, and take our very nature with him to the throne of heaven at his ascension, and then send down the Holy Spirit upon us. So this is all being contained and hinted at in this depiction. Now, when we make an icon, the way that the artist does it after he's designed the composition, according to basic standards and how he wants the eye to flow, he makes a drawing on a separate piece of paper, and then the drawing then is outlined, so he reserves just the lines that he wants, all the principal lines. Once he's done all his sort of visual thinking out loud, you sort of think out loud as you're drawing, and then you come to the lines that you want. You preserve those with a dark marker or charcoal, and then what happens, there's various ways you can do this. You can chalk the back of that drawing or use carbon paper, or you can use what's called pouncing, where you actually take a little stylus and you make holes, your little dotted holes along the lines. And then you take that paper and you put it against your board. Your board is white at this point. It's been hollowed out and painted over with gesso. It's been prepared. You put that over this, then you trace over those lines. Then it comes out like a carbon copy of the lines on the back, or if you're doing the pouncing, you take like a bag of chalk dust and you sort of tap over the paper, and then the chalk dust comes through the little holes, and it sets your lines there, just the lines that you want for your icon. Those are your guidelines. You take the paper away, and then what you do is take a stylus, some kind of pointed instrument, and you can see it if you look closely, especially the way the light might hit this icon. You can see very closely where the artist took the stylus and then he cuts into those lines. He actually carves those lines into the gesso. That's the white painted surface that prepares the board for the painting. That's going to preserve his line. So when he goes over with the paint and the colors, which he does in successive layers, he can still follow those guidelines. You can see them rather clearly in here with certain angles and certain, if you catch the light a certain way. All these lines that you see here, the outline of the hand, the outline of the cloth, the face, they all have a scribed line that guides them. Then what the iconographer does is he begins with the deepest colors, and he works in successive layers. He has to let one layer dry and put on the next layer, and he moves to the lightest colors, adding the highlights last. And this, even in itself, remember we said that iconography is a lifestyle, based in a monastic lifestyle primarily, with asceticism, but with a theology to it. This process of darkness, of light coming out of darkness, hopefully you caught that right away, yes. The spiritual life, Christ the light coming into the world of darkness. So iconography works in the same pattern. Darkness, starting out with darkness, light emerging from darkness, until we get to the brightest highlights. Look closely at her face, or the face of Christ, but in this case, the face of the Virgin Mary is larger. You see right in here the deepest tones that the artist puts on first for the flesh, and there's sort of an earthy green. Sometimes it could even almost be like a brown, like a light kind of umber, or just a deep, almost like olive, earthy green. And over top of that, he's going to put then a layer. You can see right in through here. See how it begins to warm up gradually? It's just called opening up the icon, like as if the figure is going to emerge out of the icon, out of the picture plane. The warmth starts to then be added, and then he starts to get even lighter, brighter colors, and finally he comes to the highlights. You see the highlights like here and here on the little strategic areas, the end of the nose, edge of the nose, the chin, top of the lip, the bottom lip there. You can see the same thing on Christ, and that gives it that sense of light coming from the person. We talked about the icon of the Transfiguration earlier, and that icon speaks about the light of Tabor. Well, this is like the light of Tabor, the holiness of that person, their light coming through their countenance. That's what iconography does. It doesn't use so much cast shadows, in other words, where there's an exterior source of light. For instance, you might see shadows on me right now because there's a light source that's external to me. The light is being cast on me, so you might see different shadows. Part of my face might be lighter than this part or whatever. Those are shadows that are created by an external light source, and this is very much the trick and the magic, the beauty of secular or natural art. It's sometimes called theater lighting, the dramatic lighting, where there's many of the so for instance, the Renaissance and Baroque artists like Michelangelo Caravaggio, or Michelangelo, the famous Michelangelo. These artists were famous for their use of chiaroscuro. In other words, the light that comes from outside and casts these magnificent shadows and makes this very naturalistic, a lifelike portrayal. Well, iconography doesn't do that. It has an internal light, not an exterior light, because it's the person transfigured that's being painted. Their inner beauty, their inner goodness, that light of Tabor coming through them. And so that's why then the light source comes from within, not from without. Now, on the Virgin Mary, you see in her colors of her robes, you see, like, for instance, on the edge here, some of the areas that are darkest. That's where the artist would have started with. Then he would work eventually through the lighter, which is a kind of a deep earthy red. The reason why it's red, she wears red because red is an earth color, and it is from her that Jesus Christ, who is God, receives his human nature. So the color earth, or color red, is from the earth. So he receives his earthiness, his earthly character or nature from his mother, his earthly mother. And the iconographer then works towards the lightest. You see the highlights, especially around the face, and they're the most bright. She has 3 stars, representing the fact that she remained a virgin before, during, and after the birth of Christ. She has a kind of a almost like a bonnet type of figure here. It's part of it's a kind of a symbol of a queen, like a royalty. There's a royalty here. She is from the house of David. She's from royal lineage, because the Christ would come from the house of David. And she would be, of course, the queen, the queen mother, the queen of heaven. And here, then, inside the halo, even this is significant. You have 3 letters here, which are Greek abbreviations for the words ho on, means I am who am. What is it saying? That Jesus Christ, who looks like a human being, looks like a child, but also like a man, was not just human, he was also I am, Yahweh. He was God. And there, of course, is the ICXC, Jesus Christ, Jesus Christos, ho on. Here, Mater Theo, Greek for the Mother of God. There are many, many titles for the Mother of God. Many of them we use in our liturgy, especially. We have a whole service dedicated to multiple poetic titles and descriptions of the Mother of God. It's called the Akathist to the Virgin Mary. High poetry in the Eastern churches. Yet, the name that we deem to be the most appropriate for her, for the Virgin Mary, is Mother of God. Meaning that whatever we say about her is an affirmation about Christ, and vice versa. Whatever we know about Christ then determines who she is. And this is why early on in the early centuries of the church, the Christological heresies, the councils that hammered out the true teaching of Jesus Christ, always had to include, and therefore, or just as a natural course, also clarified who she was. It's all about their relationship together. Understanding one defines the other, and vice versa. So she is the Mother of God, meaning that this person who she carried in her womb, like any mother as a human being, was also God. That made her the Mother of God. She's not the Mother of God in the strict sense where God had a mother and he didn't exist before he had a mother. It means it's an affirmation of the person she carried in her womb, who was 2 natures. He was Jesus Christ. He was also God. And that's what's most important, that this person was Jesus Christ and God. Not just a person, not just a human being, not just human nature, but also divine. Again, both and. One person, 2 natures. In this icon, we have, above all, again, that union of heaven and earth. In all the way that it's painted, all the dimension, the bodies being, in a sense, almost bodiless. You can tell there's a body there, but it's not very anatomical. You're not seeing profound muscles and so on. You're saying, yeah, it looks like he's got a knee there and she's got a shoulder there, but you don't really see much else, because you're seeing these persons as if you're seeing them in the eschaton, spiritualized. You're seeing them basically in a timelessness, present in earth as we know it, yes, a body, but yet a body spiritualized, a body already in the eschaton. And again, this is that great vision, the great genius of iconography. It brings to us that vision of heaven on earth, of the invisible God made visible, of our origins, our original innocence and beauty and glory as a human being, and how we will be in the eschaton, our destiny, body and soul reunited, reintegrated together, spiritualized, and glorious once again, as God always intended it to be. Iconography, the vision, the one and only honest vision of life, a fantastic, sophisticated art form, and a lifestyle for for the viewer and for those who create icons. Glory to Jesus Christ.